A piece of tape that has been stuck to one too many things and has just lost all value. A lollipop that's been passed around a room and licked by a bunch of people. Ew, gross. A flower that has been picked and lost all of its petals. Backwash in a cup. These are all analogies I have heard over and over again throughout my youth to describe people who have not chosen to wait until marriage to be intimate with another person. Since you are all here as members of the Christian church and have grown up in a similar society that I have grown up in, you may have heard similar analogies. And this is what purity culture is. Now, you may not be familiar with the term purity culture, but you're probably pretty familiar with a lot of what it promotes. Purity culture is the idea that the most important thing in the entire world is that you must remain a virgin until you're married. That the gift that you have, the most important gift in the entire world, is that, and that you have to give that to your future spouse, particularly your husband, because it's mostly aimed at women. And if you give it to anyone else, you are stealing that gift from your hypothetical future husband. If you have any sexual thoughts or desires or sexual being in any sense, you must repent of that and feel horrible about it and get on your knees and pray for forgiveness because that's wrong and terrible and bad until you're married. As soon as you're married, that magically disappears and you're supposed to suddenly feel okay with everything. These are lines that, as I have heard through youth groups and sermons my entire adolescent life, I'm sure that you're probably familiar with some of them as well. And along with just not being true, they're also extremely damaging. And I've recently come to acknowledge that in my own life and realize that I'm not alone as I've spoken to friends, started reading books, looked at research, and found out that in many ways, these symptoms of those who have lived through purity culture mimic those with PTSD. And before I lose you on that, I'm someone who's dealt with PTSD, and I can tell you that nightmares and panic attacks and constant anxiety and intrusive thoughts are all true of dealing with sex and sexuality coming out of purity culture just as they are with PTSD. One of the biggest myths that we were all fed about sexuality in the church is that if you were a good Christian girl or boy, you would have a perfect marriage. You would find your Prince Charming or your princess. You would have a fulfilled, amazing marriage where nothing would ever be wrong. And the moment you got married, a light switch would turn on, and all of the shame and guilt that you had been fed your entire life regarding your sexuality would disappear. The past 2 decades of shame and guilt and dirtiness and bad that you had been made to feel would go out the window. And unfortunately, that's not how psychology works. And I am living proof of that, as I have been married for 3 years now in a very healthy, wonderful relationship, and I still feel weird about the fact that I am a sexual human being and that sex is an okay thing to want. I shouldn't feel shame and guilt about that, but I do. And that's weird as a 27-year-old adult, and again, I'm not alone in that. I remember being alone in my dorm room at 19 at Taylor University, which was a conservative Christian college in Indiana, when a friend sent me a video from a pastor named Matt Chandler. And this pastor had attended a sermon from a pastor who had given the worst possible definition of sex imaginable. He had started out his sermon, this other pastor, not Matt, by handing around a flower to an audience of a couple hundred, and then proceeded to tell everyone how sex is bad, dirty, shameful, abominable. If you do it with anyone, you're basically cursed, the worst human alive. And then at the end of the sermon, he came back and picked up the flower from the audience, which didn't look so hot after being handed around to so many people, and held it up as an example of what you would be if you gave yourself to other people and yelled at the audience, "Who would want this?" And Matt said it was all that he could do not to yell in that sermon, Jesus wants the rose, that's the point of the gospel. And in that moment, as I was very into faith at that point, I started sobbing in my room because no one had ever expressed to me that there would be any redemption if I ever made choices that were outside purity culture. I was a good Christian girl, I adhered to everything it ever taught me, but what if I didn't? What if I ever made choices that were outside of that? I was always told that basically I would be worth less and worthless and cursed and no one would really want me. And the idea that there would be redemption was something I never heard. And that's unique in Christian culture because every other sin, there's redemption and hope and forgiveness for. It's the language we use to talk about other sins, even murder and theft are, someone stumbled, they fell down, they made a mistake. Jesus can help them get back up. But when we're talking about sexual sins or losing your virginity, it's final. That's it. And especially when you're talking to young people who are forming their sexuality, which is weird and awkward to talk about anyways, those leave scars. And so when I heard those words in my dorm room at 19, it started this idea in me that maybe I wouldn't be worthless if I made other choices. And I wish someone had told me that sooner. And as an audience that has been raised in a similar society to me and has heard many of those same analogies, I want to take some time today to express to you that whatever choices you have made or haven't made, wherever your sexuality falls or doesn't fall, sexuality and worth and value are different things. And I hope that someone has taken the time to explain that to you after exiting purity culture, but if they haven't, please know that that is the case. Please know that if you believe in the God of the Bible, which I'm not entirely sure if I do or I don't some days, I struggle with faith, but if you do, He is a God of love, He is a God of redemption and of hope and forgiveness. And so whatever choices you have made, whatever choices you haven't made, I promise you, there is hope and healing and redemption, and what purity culture told you is not accurate. You are worth everything. You are so valuable. And whatever healing you feel you can need, we can walk that journey together.